I never thought my propane tanks would become the most controversial topic in Ridgemont Springs, Colorado. But here I was, staring at a certified letter from the homeowners association demanding I remove them from my property within 48 hours or face escalating fines. My name is Andrew Fletcher, and I had been living in this pristine suburban development for 3 years. The neighborhood was one of those picture-perfect communities where every house looked like it belonged in a catalog, with manicured lawns, uniform mailboxes, and enough restrictions to make a prison warden jealous. When I first moved in, I thought the HOA rules were just standard stuff about keeping your grass trimmed and not painting your house neon pink. I was wrong. The whole propane situation started innocently enough. I am an avid outdoorsman and weekend griller, and I like to be prepared. After a camping trip where I ran out of fuel halfway through cooking dinner, I decided to stock up. I bought 6 20-pound propane tanks and stored them neatly on the side of my house, behind a decorative lattice screen that matched my exterior perfectly. They were completely out of sight from the street, tucked away in a spot where only someone actively snooping around my property would notice them. That someone turned out to be Patricia Cunningham, the HOA president and the walking embodiment of every neighborhood busybody stereotype you could imagine. Patricia was a 52-year-old woman with that distinctive haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," and an arsenal of pastel pantsuits that she rotated like a military uniform. She drove a white Lexus SUV with a personalized plate that read Hoken, which I assumed was supposed to mean HOA Queen, but just looked ridiculous. I first encountered Patricia's wrath on a Tuesday morning in early November. I was getting ready for work, drinking my coffee and reviewing some reports for my job as a civil engineer when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Patricia standing there with her tablet, already pulled up to some section of the HOA bylaws. "Mr. Fletcher," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, "I need to discuss a serious violation on your property." "Good morning to you too, Patricia," I replied, trying to keep my tone civil. "What seems to be the problem?" She held up her tablet, showing me a photo she had apparently taken of the side of my house. "These propane tanks constitute a safety hazard and violate Section 7.3.2 of our community guidelines regarding the storage of flammable materials on residential properties." I blinked at her. "Patricia, those tanks are completely legal. People all over the country store propane tanks at their homes. How do you think anyone uses a gas grill?" "The bylaws allow for one 20-pound propane tank to be stored, currently in use with grilling equipment," she recited as if reading from a sacred text. "You have 6 tanks. That is excessive and dangerous." "They are properly stored, sealed, and in a ventilated area," I explained, feeling my patience already wearing thin. "I use them for camping, grilling, and my portable heater for ice fishing. There is nothing dangerous about having backup tanks." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "The rules are the rules, Mr. Fletcher. You have 48 hours to remove the excess tanks, or you will be fined $500. For each subsequent week of non-compliance, the fine will increase by $250. "This is ridiculous," I said, but she was already walking away, her sensible heels clicking on my driveway with an air of smug satisfaction. I called my buddy Marcus that afternoon. Marcus had lived in the neighborhood for 5 years and had his own run-ins with Patricia over various minor issues. He worked as an attorney, though his specialty was corporate law, not HOA disputes. "She is absolutely overreaching," Marcus confirmed after I explained the situation. "The thing is, when you bought your house, you signed those HOA documents. They can be pretty broad, and fighting them is often more expensive than it is worth. So what? I just cave? I asked, frustrated. You could go to the next HOA board meeting and dispute it, Marcus suggested. But between you and me, Patricia runs that board like her personal fiefdom. The other members are either too scared of her or too apathetic to push back on anything she wants. I decided to fight it anyway. I was not going to let some power-hungry neighborhood dictator tell me I could not store completely legal and safe equipment on my own property. I spent that evening researching Colorado state laws, fire codes, and propane storage regulations. Everything I found confirmed what I already knew. My setup was perfectly legal and safe. The next day, I sent a detailed email to the HOA board, copying all the members I could find listed on the community website. I cited specific fire codes, state regulations, and even included photos of my storage setup showing the proper clearances, ventilation, and safety measures I had in place. I explained that the tanks were properly maintained, never stored in direct sunlight, and kept away from any ignition sources. I concluded by respectfully requesting that the violation notice be withdrawn. Patricia responded within an hour. Her email was curt and dismissive. Your email has been received. The violation stands. You now have 24 hours to comply. I could not believe she had shortened my deadline. This woman was unbelievable. That weekend, I attended the HOA board meeting, which was held in the community clubhouse. The clubhouse was another one of those amenities that looked great in the real estate listing, but was really just a glorified meeting room with some exercise equipment that nobody used. About 15 homeowners were there, most looking as thrilled to be there as I felt. The board consisted of Patricia as president, a timid man named Roger Harrison as vice president, and 3 other members who barely spoke. Patricia ran through the usual agenda items with mechanical efficiency, discussing things like the upcoming holiday decoration guidelines and the pool maintenance schedule for next summer. When we reached new business, I raised my hand. "Yes, Mr. Fletcher," Patricia said, her tone suggesting she had been expecting this. I stood up, holding the folder I had prepared with all my documentation. "I would like to address the violation notice I received regarding propane storage. I believe the notice is overly restrictive and not supported by any legitimate safety concerns." I proceeded to present my case, laying out the fire codes, state regulations, and safety measures. A few other homeowners actually looked interested, and one older gentleman nodded along as I spoke. When I finished, Patricia did not even look at my documents. "Mr. Fletcher, your presentation is noted. However, the HOA bylaws are clear. The board voted on this matter before this meeting, and the decision is unanimous. The violation stands." "You already voted?" I asked, incredulous. Before even hearing my side, "We reviewed your email," Roger squeaked from his seat, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "And we determined that the original assessment was correct." I looked around at the other board members, but they would not meet my eyes. It was clear Patricia had already decided, and they were just rubber stamping her decisions. "This is absurd," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "You are enforcing an arbitrary interpretation of the rules that goes beyond reasonable safety concerns." "Mind your tone, Mr. Fletcher," Patricia warned. "You are in violation, and if you do not comply by tomorrow evening, the fines will begin." I left that meeting furious. I went home and, out of sheer spite, refused to move the tanks. I knew it was going to cost me, but the principle of the thing mattered. I was not going to be bullied by Patricia Cunningham. Sure enough, the following week I received another letter informing me that I had been fined $500, and that the amount would increase by $250 each week until I complied. The letter also warned that continued non-compliance could result in a lien being placed on my property. Marcus came over that evening, and we sat on my back deck, the November cold starting to settle in. "You are really going to fight this?" he asked, sipping the beer I had handed him. "I am really going to fight this," I confirmed. "This is my property. Those tanks are legal and safe. She has no right." "HOAs have more rights than you think," Marcus cautioned. "But if you are committed, you might want to consult with someone who specializes in property law or HOA disputes." I took his advice and scheduled a consultation with an attorney named Jennifer Walsh, who had experience with HOA cases. Her office was in downtown Denver, about 45 minutes from Ridgemont Springs. Jennifer was in her early 40s, professional and direct. She reviewed my documentation and the HOA bylaws during our meeting. "Here is the situation," she explained. "Technically, the HOA bylaw about flammable materials is vague enough that they can interpret it this way. However, the enforcement seems arbitrary and excessive. The problem is that fighting this will likely cost you more in legal fees than just paying the fines or moving the tanks. What if other homeowners have similar violations that are not being enforced?" I asked, Jennifer's eyebrows raised. "If you can document selective enforcement, that would strengthen your case significantly. HOAs cannot pick and choose who they enforce rules against without justification." That gave me an idea. Over the next week, I took walks around the neighborhood, really paying attention to what my neighbors had on their properties. I started documenting everything with photos and notes. I found multiple violations that Patricia seemed to have no problem with. Tom Henderson, 3 houses down, had a storage shed that was clearly larger than the bylaws allowed. The Kramers had a trampoline, which was explicitly prohibited due to liability concerns. The Yashidas had planted trees in their front yard that were not on the approved species list. Most interesting was what I discovered at Patricia's own house. During an evening walk, I noticed she had a decorative gas lamp post in her front yard, the kind that runs on propane. I did some research and found that those typically use a 20-pound tank that is buried or stored in the lamp post base. I could not prove it without trespassing, but the setup was obvious. I compiled everything into a detailed report and sent it to Jennifer. She reviewed it and called me back the next day. "This is good," she said. "The selective enforcement angle is strong. I would recommend sending a formal letter to the HOA board pointing out these inconsistencies and demanding they either enforce all violations equally or withdraw yours." I had Jennifer draft the letter, which cost me $300 but was worth every penny for the professional language and legal weight it carried. The letter pointed out the specific violations I had documented, noted the arbitrary nature of my enforcement, and demanded that the violation against me be withdrawn and the fines refunded. It also mentioned that if the HOA continued to pursue the matter, I would have no choice but to consider legal action for harassment and selective enforcement. Patricia's response came faster than I expected. She showed up at my door on a Saturday morning, her face red with anger. "How dare you spy on your neighbors and photograph their properties?" she shouted the moment I opened the door. "I was taking walks in my own neighborhood and documenting what I saw from public streets and sidewalks," I replied calmly. "The same way you took photos of my property." "Those other situations are completely different," Patricia sputtered. "How so?" I asked. "Either rules are enforced equally or they are not enforced at all. You cannot target me specifically because you feel like it." "The board will be addressing those other violations in due time," she said, regaining some composure. "Really? because some of those violations have existed for years based on what my neighbors tell me, but you noticed my tanks within weeks of me putting them up." Patricia's jaw clenched. "You have not heard the end of this, Mr. Fletcher." She turned and marched back to her Lexus. I watched her drive away, wondering what fresh hell she was about to unleash. The answer came in the form of another letter, this time informing me that I was being fined an additional $1,000 for harassing behavior toward HOA leadership and other homeowners based on my surveillance activities. The letter claimed that multiple neighbors had complained about me photographing their properties. This was getting out of hand. I immediately called Jennifer Walsh. "They cannot do this," she said after I read her the letter. "This is retaliation, plain and simple. I think it is time to file a formal complaint and possibly pursue litigation." The legal fees were going to add up quickly, but I was too far in to back down now. Jennifer filed a formal complaint with the Colorado HOA Regulatory Board and prepared a lawsuit against the HOA for harassment, retaliation, and selective enforcement. Meanwhile, the neighborhood had taken notice of the battle. Some homeowners approached me quietly to express their support, though most were too afraid of Patricia to say anything publicly. A few others clearly sided with Patricia, giving me dirty looks when I was out and about. Marcus remained my steadfast ally throughout all of this. "Patricia has been pulling this stuff for years," he told me over dinner one evening at his house. "She drove the Mitchells out of the neighborhood 2 years ago over some dispute about their garage door color. They just sold and moved rather than deal with her anymore." "That is what she is counting on," I said. "She just wants me to give up and either comply or leave." "Well, she picked the wrong guy this time," Marcus said, raising his glass in a toast. By early December, the legal wheels were turning slowly but surely. Jennifer had filed all the necessary paperwork, and we were waiting for responses and potential mediation dates. In the meantime, the weather had started to turn serious. Colorado winters could be unpredictable, and the meteorologists were starting to talk about a major storm system that was developing. I had mostly forgotten about the propane situation in the immediate sense because I was so focused on the legal battle, but I kept the tanks exactly where they were on principle. I even bought 2 more tanks, bringing my total to 8, just to make the point that I was not backing down. On December 10th, the weather forecast became impossible to ignore. A massive blizzard was bearing down on Colorado, and it was going to be one of the worst in years. The National Weather Service was predicting up to 3 feet of snow, wind gusts of 50 miles per hour, and temperatures dropping well below zero. Everyone was being advised to stock up on supplies and prepare for potential power outages that could last days. I took the warning seriously. I made sure all my tanks were full, bought extra food and water, charged all my backup batteries, and got my generator ready. The generator was another thing Patricia had complained about previously, but that violation notice had gotten lost in the shuffle of the propane dispute. The storm hit on December 13th, a Friday evening. It started with light snow that quickly escalated into a full whiteout. By midnight, the wind was howling, and snow was piling up at an alarming rate. I watched from my window as the street disappeared under a blanket of white. By Saturday morning, the power was out. The entire neighborhood was dark, and the temperature in my house started to drop quickly. I fired up my generator, which powered my essential systems, and set up my propane heater in the living room to supplement the heat. The heater was designed for indoor use with proper ventilation, and it kept my main living space comfortable, while the generator kept my refrigerator and a few lights running. I could see my neighbors' houses sitting dark and silent in the blowing snow. A few had generators running, but most did not. The storm was worse than predicted, with the snow continuing to fall heavily throughout Saturday and into Sunday. The news reported that the entire region was paralyzed, with roads impassable and power crews unable to reach affected areas because of the conditions. On Sunday afternoon, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Roger Harrison, the HOA vice president, standing on my porch looking miserable. Snow was caked on his jacket and his face was red from the cold. "Roger," I said, surprised. "Come in, get out of that wind." He stepped inside gratefully, stamping snow off his boots. "Thank you, Andrew. I am sorry to bother you." "What is going on?" I asked, noting how he seemed nervous. "It is Patricia," he said. "She sent me to talk to you." "Of course she did." I waited for him to continue. "Her power is out and she has no heat. She is running low on propane for her fireplace, and she was wondering if you might be willing to lend her one of your tanks." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. When it did not come, I actually laughed out loud. "You are serious," I said. "Patricia sent you here to ask if she can borrow one of the propane tanks that she fined me for having. The same tanks she has been trying to force me to get rid of for the past month." Roger looked deeply uncomfortable. "I know how it sounds. But her house is getting very cold and she is worried about her pipes freezing." "Where is Patricia now?" I asked. "At her house. She is waiting for me to come back." "No," I said. "If Patricia wants to ask me for a favor, she can come ask me herself. I am not dealing with intermediaries." Roger looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. "I will tell her." He left, trudging back through the snow. I watched him go, shaking my head in disbelief at the audacity of it all. About 20 minutes later, there was another knock. This time, it was Patricia herself, though she looked nothing like the imperious HOA president who usually showed up at my door. She was bundled in a heavy coat, but her face was pinched with cold, and she looked genuinely worried. "Mr. Fletcher," she said stiffly when I opened the door. "Patricia," I replied, not inviting her in. "I am sure Roger explained the situation," she continued. "I would like to purchase one of your propane tanks. I will pay you whatever you want." "You mean the tanks you fined me for, the ones you said were dangerous and violated HOA rules?" She had the decency to look embarrassed. "This is an emergency situation." "It is," I agreed. "And I have propane because I prepared for emergencies. Unlike some people who were more concerned with enforcing petty rules than making sure they could take care of themselves." "Please," Patricia said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into her voice. "My house is down to 45 degrees. I have nowhere else to go in this storm." I considered making her really beg for it, but I am not actually a monster. "Here is the deal," I said. "I will give you a tank." Not sell, give. But in exchange, you are going to withdraw all the violations and fines against me, provide that in writing, and publicly apologize at the next HOA meeting for the harassment and selective enforcement. Patricia's face went through several expressions: anger, indignation, and finally resignation. "Fine," she said quietly. "Say it clearly," I pressed. "I want to hear you agree to all of it." "I agree," she said through gritted teeth. "I will withdraw the violations and fines, provide written confirmation, and apologize at the next meeting." "Great," I said. "Wait here." I went to my side yard and retrieved one of my full propane tanks. I carried it back and set it on the porch in front of her. "This should last you a few days if you use it carefully," I explained. "Make sure your fireplace connections are secure and that you have proper ventilation." She picked up the tank without meeting my eyes. "Thank you," she mumbled. "One more thing," I said before she could leave. "I want that written agreement by tomorrow, even if you have to write it by hand and walk it over here." She nodded and struggled back through the snow toward her house, carrying the tank. Marcus called me later that evening on my cell phone, which was still working despite the power outage. "Dude, is it true that Patricia came begging you for propane?" he asked, barely containing his laughter. "News travels fast," I said. Roger's wife texted my wife. "This is the best thing that has happened in this neighborhood in years. Patricia Cunningham had to eat crow." The storm continued through Monday, and the power remained out throughout most of the neighborhood. Several other neighbors knocked on my door asking about propane, generators, or just wanting to warm up for a bit. I helped where I could, sharing supplies and letting people charge their phones with my generator. On Tuesday morning, the snow finally stopped. The accumulation was massive, nearly 40 inches, with drifts up to 6 feet in some places. The temperature had dropped to -10 degrees, and the whole world seemed frozen and still. Patricia showed up at my door mid-morning with a handwritten letter, as promised. It stated that all violations and fines against me regarding propane storage were withdrawn and that any money I had paid would be refunded. She had signed and dated it. "The full board will ratify this at our next meeting," she said stiffly, "and I will make the apology as agreed." "Good," I said, taking the letter. "How are you holding up?" She seemed surprised by the question. "Cold, but managing. The tank you gave me is helping." "The power should be back soon," I said. "They are saying crews are making progress." She nodded and left without further conversation. The power did come back on Wednesday afternoon, after 5 days of outage. The neighborhood slowly came back to life, with people digging out driveways and assessing damage. Several homes had burst pipes from the freezing temperatures, and the community was dealing with the aftermath of one of the worst storms in Colorado history. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for early January, and I made sure to attend. The clubhouse was packed with more homeowners than I had ever seen at one of these meetings, everyone clearly curious about how Patricia would handle the situation. Patricia called the meeting to order and went through the usual preliminaries. When it came time for old business, she cleared her throat and looked directly at me. "I need to address an ongoing matter involving Mr. Andrew Fletcher," she began. "Over the past 2 months, I pursued violations against Mr. Fletcher regarding propane tank storage on his property. After further review and consideration, especially in light of recent emergency situations, the board has determined that the violations were inappropriately applied. All fines against Mr. Fletcher are withdrawn, and any monies paid will be refunded." She paused, clearly struggling with what came next. "Additionally, I want to personally apologize to Mr. Fletcher for the manner in which this situation was handled. The enforcement was inconsistent with how other similar situations have been addressed, and the response to Mr. Fletcher's legitimate concerns was inappropriate. I am sorry for the harassment and stress this caused." The room was silent. You could have heard a pin drop. "Thank you, Patricia," I said, standing up. "I appreciate the apology and the board's reconsideration. I hope moving forward, the HOA can focus on reasonable, consistent enforcement of rules that actually enhance our community, rather than arbitrary restrictions that serve no real purpose." Several homeowners actually applauded, which clearly irritated Patricia, but she kept her composure. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me to congratulate me on standing up to Patricia. A few shared their own stories of issues with the HOA, and there seemed to be a growing sentiment that maybe it was time for some changes in leadership. Marcus caught up with me as I was leaving. "That was beautiful," he said. "I have never seen Patricia have to back down like that." "It should not have taken a blizzard for her to see reason," I said, "but I will take the win." Over the following weeks, things in the neighborhood started to shift. Patricia was noticeably less aggressive in her HOA enforcement, almost subdued. The experience had clearly affected her, though I doubted she would ever admit it publicly beyond the forced apology. In February, I received a formal letter from the HOA board confirming that the propane tank storage rules had been officially revised. The new guidelines allowed for reasonable storage of propane tanks for legitimate residential use, with basic safety requirements that were actually sensible. The letter thanked me for bringing the matter to the board's attention and helping improve the community standards. I also received my refund check for the $500 in fines I had paid, along with a reimbursement for the $300 I spent on Jennifer Walsh's initial letter. That part was unexpected but appreciated. Jennifer called me after everything was resolved. "Congratulations," she said. "This turned out better than I expected. Most HOA disputes either drag on forever or end with someone moving out." "I got lucky with the timing," I admitted. "If that storm had not hit when it did, who knows how this would have ended." "Sometimes the universe has a sense of irony," Jennifer laughed. By March, when HOA elections came around, there was a surprising development. Roger Harrison decided to run against Patricia for the president position. Even more surprising, he won. It turned out that a lot of homeowners had been quietly frustrated with Patricia's leadership, but felt too intimidated to speak up. My battle with her over the propane tanks had opened the floodgates. Patricia remained on the board as a regular member, but her reign as the neighborhood dictator was over. Roger turned out to be a much more reasonable leader, focused on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement of arbitrary rules. I ran into Patricia at the grocery store one Saturday in April. We had mostly avoided each other since the whole incident, but there was no escaping the encounter in the produce section. "Andrew," she said with a slight nod. "Patricia," I replied. There was an awkward pause, and then she spoke again. "I wanted to thank you, actually. That caught me off guard." "Thank me." "Losing the presidency was humiliating," she admitted, examining an apple with more attention than necessary. "But it also made me realize I had become exactly the kind of person I used to complain about. I was so focused on control and rules that I forgot the point was supposed to be making the neighborhood better for everyone." It was the most human I had ever seen Patricia. "That takes guts to admit," I said. "Well, being forced to beg for propane during a blizzard is pretty humbling," she said with a slight, self-deprecating smile. "For what it is worth, I really am sorry for how I treated you." "I appreciate that," I said. "And for what it is worth, I think the new storage guidelines are actually pretty good. They keep people safe without being unreasonable," she nodded. "That was the goal. I helped Roger draft them, actually." We parted ways after that, and while we never became friends, there was at least a mutual respect that had not existed before. The propane tanks remained in their spot on the side of my house, now completely legal and uncontroversial. I kept them well maintained and properly stored, just as I always had. They came in handy several more times that year during camping trips, ice fishing expeditions, and another, smaller winter storm in late November. The following December, as the first anniversary of the big blizzard approached, the neighborhood threw a winter preparedness fair at the clubhouse. Roger had organized it as a way to help homeowners learn from the previous year's experience and be better prepared for emergencies. There were booths about generators, winter supplies, home weatherization, and yes, proper propane storage. I volunteered to man the propane information booth, which I found deeply ironic and amusing. I brought one of my tanks and the proper storage equipment, demonstrating the safety measures and answering questions. Several neighbors bought their own backup tanks after talking with me, and I helped them understand the regulations and best practices. Patricia even stopped by my booth. "You have come full circle," she observed. "Life is funny that way," I replied. "Who would have thought that the tanks you wanted to find me over would end up being the example for proper storage?" "I certainly did not see it coming," she admitted, "but I am glad it worked out this way." Marcus came by later and took a photo of me at the booth, which he immediately posted to the neighborhood social media page with the caption, "From HOA villain to community resource, character development." It got a lot of likes and laughing emojis. As winter settled in again, I made sure I was well prepared. I kept my 8 propane tanks full and properly stored, maintained my generator, and had plenty of supplies on hand. Several of my neighbors did the same, having learned from the previous year's close call. The neighborhood had changed in subtle but important ways. The HOA was more focused on genuine community building rather than petty enforcement. Homeowners felt more empowered to speak up when rules seemed unreasonable. And there was a greater sense of preparedness and mutual support, with neighbors checking on each other during weather events and sharing resources when needed. I kept all the documentation from my battle with Patricia in a file folder in my office. Sometimes I would pull it out and reread the violation notices, the legal letters, and finally the apology and resolution. It served as a reminder that standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult and expensive, could actually make a difference. The legal fees had totaled about $2,000, even with the reimbursement, but I considered it money well spent. I had not just fought for my right to store propane tanks, I had fought against arbitrary authority and selective enforcement, and I had won. Marcus often joked that I should write a book about the experience, calling it The Great Propane Wars of Ridgemont Springs. I laughed it off, but there was a part of me that appreciated the ridiculousness of the whole situation. Who fights a months-long legal battle with their HOA over propane tanks? Apparently, I do. But it was never really about the propane tanks. It was about the principle that homeowners should not be subjected to arbitrary, inconsistent enforcement of rules by people drunk on their tiny bit of power. It was about standing up to bullies, even when they come in the form of middle-aged women in pastel pantsuits carrying HOA bylaws like weapons. The following spring, I was elected to the HOA board myself. I ran on a platform of common-sense rules, consistent enforcement, and focusing on things that actually mattered to the community. I won easily, which told me that my fight had resonated with more people than I realized. Serving on the board gave me a new perspective on the challenges of managing a homeowners association. There were legitimate concerns about property values, safety, and maintaining community standards. But there was also a clear line between reasonable governance and petty tyranny, and I made it my mission to keep the board on the right side of that line. Patricia and I ended up working together on several projects, including a complete revision of the HOA bylaws to remove outdated, overly restrictive, or vaguely worded rules. It was strange, working collaboratively with someone who had been my nemesis just a year earlier, but people can change when given the chance. One evening in June, during a particularly long board meeting about landscaping standards, Patricia and I were the last 2 people in the clubhouse, cleaning up. "You know," she said, stacking chairs, "I never told you this, but that propane tank you gave me during the blizzard probably saved my house. My pipes would have frozen without that heat." "I am glad I could help," I said, "even if the circumstances were completely absurd." "Especially because the circumstances were absurd," she corrected with a smile. "I needed that wake-up call. I had become someone I did not like very much. "We all get caught up in things sometimes," I offered. "The important thing is that you recognized it and changed." She nodded thoughtfully. "I joined the HOA board years ago because I wanted to help maintain property values and keep the neighborhood nice. Somewhere along the way, it became about control and winning arguments. Your propane tanks, as ridiculous as it sounds, reminded me what actually matters." It was a surprising moment of vulnerability from Patricia, and I appreciated it. "Well, I am glad some good came out of the whole mess," I said. As we finished cleaning up and headed to our cars, I thought about how much had changed in a year and a half. I had gone from being a relative newcomer who kept to himself to an active member of the community and HOA board. Patricia had gone from a feared dictator to a more reasonable, collaborative leader. The neighborhood itself had become more resilient and connected. All because of 6 propane tanks and a blizzard. The irony was not lost on me that the very thing Patricia had tried so hard to force me to remove ended up being what saved her house and changed our entire community for the better. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about these things. I continued to maintain my propane tank collection, which had become something of a neighborhood landmark. New residents would hear the story and come by to see the famous tanks that sparked the Great Propane Rebellion, as Marcus had taken to calling it. I did not mind. It was a good reminder that standing up for yourself, even over something as mundane as propane storage, could have ripple effects you never anticipated. The HOA remained a part of life in Ridgemont Springs, but it was a different HOA than the one I had first encountered when I moved in. It was more reasonable, more responsive, and more focused on genuine community benefit. And if there was ever any question about someone storing propane tanks properly, everyone knew exactly who to ask. Years later, I would still occasionally get calls from people in other neighborhoods dealing with their own HOA nightmares. Word had spread somehow about my successful battle against Patricia and the Ridgemont Springs HOA. I would listen to their stories, offer advice, and remind them that sometimes you have to stand your ground, even when it seems easier to give in. Most importantly, I learned that preparation and principles can intersect in unexpected ways. My decision to keep extra propane tanks was about being prepared for emergencies. My decision to fight the HOA about them was about standing up for reasonable property rights. That those two things came together during a historic blizzard was just the universe's way of proving a point. I still live in Ridgemont Springs, and my 8 propane tanks are still stored neatly behind the lattice screen on the side of my house. They are legal, safe, and a source of community legend. Every winter when the weather forecast starts looking ominous, I make sure they are all full and ready. And every winter, I remember that night when Patricia came trudging through the snow, humbled by circumstance, asking for help from the very person she had tried to fine into submission. It was a good reminder that karma has perfect timing, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply being prepared when others are not. Though in the end, it was not about revenge at all. It was about doing the right thing, standing up for reasonable principles, and helping others even when they had not been particularly helpful to you. The neighborhood learned that lesson too, and we were all better for it. The HOA became an actual asset to the community rather than a source of fear and frustration. Homeowners became more engaged and willing to speak up when something did not make sense. And perhaps most importantly, we all learned to prepare for emergencies and help each other when times got tough. Marcus still ribs me about the whole thing, especially when we are grilling and I pull out one of my propane tanks. "Remember when these were contraband?" he will say, laughing. And I do remember, but not with bitterness. Instead, I remember how something so simple became a catalyst for positive change, and how standing up to unreasonable authority, even when it was difficult, made everything better in the end. The propane tanks sit there still, a testament to preparation, principles, and the unexpected ways that conflict can lead to growth. They are just tanks of compressed gas, useful for grilling, camping, and emergency heat. But they are also a symbol of something larger: the importance of standing your ground, the power of community, and the reality that sometimes the people who oppose you most strongly end up becoming unexpected allies. That is the real story of my battle with the HOA over propane storage. It started with an unreasonable fine and ended with a transformed community. It taught me about persistence, showed Patricia about humility, and reminded everyone in Ridgemont Springs that rules should serve the community, not the other way around. And every time I see those tanks, properly stored and perfectly legal, I smile at the journey they represent and the lessons we all learned along the way.